You can play that again. I don't think we'd object at all. Oh my goodness, hi. Happy National Hearts and Flowers Day. That's what my husband calls it. You know, this is the only day in the Christian calendar that celebrates human love. And I believe that's why it's in the Christian calendar. All of the traditions of the book, this is the Arabic concept. If you're a people of the book, you're okay. And that's, the Jewish people who established the book with Torah, and the Christians with the New Testament, and then Islam with the Quran. All of the people of the book say loving God is the most important thing in the life, and then the second law is love each other. But we spend a lot of time talking about how to love God and feel God's love, and not usually a whole lot of time talking about loving each other, and we certainly don't talk about romance very much. And so the church quietly, in spite of the fact that there is no historical evidence really that this ever happened, has allowed this character, Valentine, to be continued to be called a saint, and his day to be honored by those who don't have something better to honor. If there's not something better going on February 14th, you may honor St. Valentine. I think that's fascinating. Yeah? So, I love the reading. 1 Corinthians 13, yes? That one and Khalil Gibran on love and on marriage. Yes, those two. We can just put away everything else. There was a man in the 1850s, a man named Henry Drummond. I wrote a translation of his work called One Law. And he wrote two very important books. One was a book explaining the relationship between spirituality and natural science. And the other one is one you may have received, perhaps as a Valentine, perhaps as a wedding gift. It's usually a little gift book. It's called The Greatest Thing in the World. And it's an explanation how to live 1 Corinthians 13. It's marvelous. And we used it as the fulfillment in the book One Law of all the things that he was saying about nature and spirit, because it was natural law in the spiritual world. And he was saying that the way that nature functions, where plants bring in and assume and transform the minerals, and then animals bring in and transform the elements of the plants, humanity is being brought forth by spirit and being transformed in the same way. And that love is the experience and expression of that. Isn't that fascinating? So this is a evangelistic Christian in the 1850s in Scotland. he was a colleague in some ways of Darwin, and this is what he's talking about, to integrate the two. And love is the glue. Love is the glue. 1 Corinthians was written, we think, by someone who was either Paul or one of his followers along about 60 to 90 A.D., and was one of those letters that was circulated in the house experience. There wasn't church in the first couple of hundred years of Christianity, and I love it that you guys called and asked last week. They send me a question about once a week or so, what's going on here? And it happened to be what's going on. What was the early church like? And the early church was like a bunch of people getting together and having a potluck and sharing the good news. What letters, what stories, what new ideas had been brought into the community about this incredible experience that was being called Christianity. What is this? And so they would have a meal, and someone would bless the bread and the wine in the same way that is done at every Seder in the Hebrew tradition and is called communion in the Christian tradition, right? And then as they shared this bread and this wine, everyone would feel this wonderful flowing, and the place was a love fest. That's what it was. Every gathering of Christians was a love fest. And Paul talks about the gifts that came out of it. prophesying is one of the gifts. Teaching, healing, and prophesying is not saying, oh, this is happening somewhere down the road. No. Prophesying is going, oh my goodness, God is saying something through me, and allowing the words to be spoken. That's prophesying. And what Paul's telling us in 1 Corinthians is, if I can do that, but I don't have the love, I'm nothing. I'm just a vehicle for those words. I'm empty, like a clanging cymbal. I love the way you read that, Marcy. That was beautiful. Yeah? So that was written somewhere around 60 to 90, that thing we call the letter to Corinthians. It's the first letter to the Corinthians, and that was one of the letters that was circulated in these love fests, in these times when people were letting that love and that fabulous spiritual energy flow through them and be expressed in all kinds of ways. And healings happened. They were part of getting together. And this awareness of what God is speaking to us was part of life in those gatherings. You can imagine how exciting it was. And beyond that, anybody of any caste, class, or rank was welcome regardless of caste, class, or rank. Kind of like Unitarians. It didn't matter if you were a slave or a senator, you were treated as equal in one of these gatherings. So this was how it was for a couple of hundred years. That's as long as the American nation's been around. That's how people were. Rome did its thing. The empire grew and collapsed. The various emperors would come and go. And at the time that this guy we call Valentinus, my Latin teacher would tell me, Valentinus was doing his thing. He was a leader in the church outside of Rome, in a little town it's called Terni today, Terni. And during that time, Rome was going through a huge crisis. Julius Caesar was replaced by the guy who became Augustus, right? Octavian becomes Augustus. And Augustus forgot one thing. He didn't say how the next emperor was going to be chosen. There was no clear line of descent. And it wasn't going to automatically go to the son. And it wasn't automatically going to go to the next in line in command. So what happened was every time an emperor died, it was a crisis. And on top of that, the religious structure of the empire was such that, and this was true and had been true since empire was begun, was that the emperor was treated as a god. Well, when the god dies, what do you do? Right? You got to find someone else that can be a god. That isn't easy. And the more complicated the culture, the harder it is. Well, the military had a solution. And so for the period from about 250 AD to about 300 AD, there was this thing that's called the crisis of the empire. Actually, it's from 235 to 284, but we won't quibble about that. And what it was every couple of years, the current emperor would get killed, and someone else would be chosen by the military to be the emperor, literally every couple of years. Can you imagine how we'd be functioning if every couple of years we had to find a new one to be in charge and we didn't have a means for doing it, and someone else would have to, it was a mess. And the borders started falling apart because the military wasn't doing their job. They were infighting about who's going to be the next emperor rather than out there taking care of the borders. And the empire was beginning to crumble. The economy was going to pieces. And it was interesting because this was when serfdom began. During this period was when the idea of holding a large piece of land sufficient to support a bunch of people was more important than being a senator in the city of Rome. And that began that whole period that we call the Middle Ages now. Well, anyway, toward the end, right in the middle of that, we've got this Valentinus, and he is leading these wonderful love fests in Terni, Italy. And he comes into Rome. There's a gathering of the bishops. It's long before the Nicene Council. That's 325, so we got a long time to go yet. But, there's a gathering of various leaders, and he's there, and people would come up to him, and they wanted to be married. And they were Christians who wanted to be married. Now, this was an issue. I don't know if you've read any of the letters in Paul, but he tells everyone to remain a virgin because the end time is coming, and you've got to be connected with God instead of with other people. And so it was a bit of an issue in the Christian tradition. Oh dear, what am I going to do? And so that was an ongoing thing. And Valentinus said, I'd rather you actually got married and be blessed and committed to each other than that you had these casual relationships that are normal in Rome. Okay. Well, along about that time, there was a general turned into an emperor. And he was an amazing man, a fabulous general, and he was going to restore those borders. And so in 268, this guy, Claudius II, he became known as Claudius Gothicus because he managed to take over, get the Goths back in line, right? Well, he needed a whole lot of soldiers. And it's a tradition in the Roman army that you marry after you do your tour of duty. But Valentinus was marrying all these guys because he didn't want them running around having this sexual relationship. And so it was a major political issue and became a legal problem that this Christian minister, priest, presbyter, bishop, we have no idea, was actually marrying these guys that were slated to be soldiers. And he was arrested. Now, I'm telling you all of this because these are the traditional stories. Frankly, we got no idea. There is nothing contemporary with him that describes him. Nothing. All right? So, having said that, we'll continue with the story. So, Valentinus is arrested, and he's a citizen of Rome. He's a citizen of the empire, so he can't just be summarily, done away with. And he has to go through the judicial process. And since this is an imperial decree, not a Senate law, he has to be adjudicated finally by the emperor. So, he's arrested. He's held in a home of one of the judges who's saying, I can't make this decision. And so while he's there, he's being treated as a guest. And one of the normal forms of entertainment at that time and place, while you're lounging on your couch having dinner, right, is to have philosophical debates and dialogues. Yeah? So they're having these wonderful philosophical debates, the Roman judge and the Christian minister, priest, rabbi, we don't know what. Okay? So they're having these debates, and in the course of it, the judge is saying, I can't quite fathom that this guy you call Christus is really with you and has any power. You're going to have to prove that to me. So the judge brings in one of his adopted children. He's one of those guys that takes care of the weaklings in the community, and she's blind. And he brings her into the room, and Valentinus prays over her, and she's not blind anymore. That opens up a whole new range of possibilities. The whole household becomes Christianized under Valentinus' direction. Okay. In the meantime, he's not being allowed, he's under house arrest. He's not allowed to go outside. He's not allowed to talk to his followers. He's not allowed to do anything. So how do we communicate? What's going on? And his followers are standing out there. Is he okay? Is he okay? So this is my grandmother's story. When I used to ask about Valentine's and how did this whole thing start, my grandmother said, well, he was in Italy. And in Italy, they have a lot of vines growing up around the houses. And he would take a leaf from the window, from the vine right outside the window, and he would scrawl a little, note every morning and then throw it out in the street. And one of his followers would collect that, and they collected all of these leaves. Well, the leaf was a philodendron, heart-shaped leaf. Okay? So these are the first letters from prison, right? So each morning he would, let his followers know, I'm okay, I love you. Valentine. All is well. God loves you. Valentine. On a philodendron leaf. Love it. So that's the story I grew up with. And now we have a house full of Christians with this, Christian leader trapped inside. And the emperor finally comes back from battle, and the judge says, hey, you got to meet this guy. He's got power. So the emperor and Valentinus get together, and Valentinus, answers a few questions. The emperor is kind of intrigued. This is kind of interesting stuff, and he asks a few more questions. But Valentinus did something that he had no idea he was going to do. He committed heresy. What most of us are not taught is that during the time that Jesus and the Christians were beginning to become powerful, there was a very strong tradition among the Roman soldiers that they had picked up from the Greek soldiers who had picked up from the Persians. And it was when Alexander had gone and expanded his empire back in 350. Okay, we're way back, BC, so 600 years before. The soldiers of the empire discovered a Persian presence, the Son of God, born on December 25th, named Mithras. And there was a very powerful spiritual tradition around being initiated in the blood of the god, which was, if you've seen the image, Mithras cutting the throat of a bull. And you would be in the pit underneath and be washed with the blood. That was the initiation, to be washed in the blood of the sacrifice. You never heard any of this language before. So this is Claudius, that Claudius too, not the one you've seen, Claudius. That's a totally different character, okay? This is 200 years later. Claudius too is this general. He has grown up in that tradition. Mithras is it. What are you doing with this upstart Jesu? What are you talking about? That's got nothing to do with reality. And so Valentinus went over the line, and he got stoned. No, not that way. They threw rocks at him. But he didn't die. Now that's weird. That is really weird. So they had to cut off his head. And they buried his head outside of Rome, outside one of the gates, and his followers kind of watched this, and they marked the site. And then some years later, the people from his hometown, Terni, came and took the skull back to their home, and it became a relic. Well, there are pieces of that skull all over the world, probably several skulls worth now. But, that's how the relic business was in the 12th century. So, Valentinus, having kept his followers informed, is now a martyr for the faith. And he's performed miracles, which makes him qualified to be a saint. So he gets to be sanctified. 200 years later, 498, we see Valentinus being created a saint. So, cool. Now we have Saint Valentine. It happens that the official martyrdom date was February 14, in the year 269, not 2000, 269 AD. And so that's all very cool. So Chaucer comes along and he says, but you need to pay attention. Now, Chaucer, Gregory Chaucer, remember that guy? Yeah, we usually say Chaucer. And he says, you know why we celebrate Valentine's Day, don't you? He says, February 14th is the first day of this festival that has to do with the she-wolf, Lupercalia. Lupercalia. It's not Ash Wednesday yet. Lupercalia. So I'm going to turn on my hand mic here. There we go. Can you still hear me if I come away?
Yes.
Yes, I love it when it works. All right. So Lupercalia is like the 4th of July in Rome. Okay? That is to say, it is the founding date of the city of Rome, officially. And what the story is, you may have seen there's 2 little babies and there's wolf and they're nursing on the wolf. That's Romulus and Remus. And the she-wolf has taken care of them. They were abandoned on the coast of Italy, and this wolf adopts them. And those of you who've been following Facebook and YouTube know that that's not unusual for a mammal to adopt another life form and include them as their own infants. There are all kinds of videos about that online right now. So she nursed these boys, and she grew them up to be good, strong wolves. And then some of the local Etruscans humanized these guys. And we'll talk about that another day. But the festival is always the 14th, 15th, and 16th of February. And on the 14th is the purification day. It's when we clear out, and it's just like when we talked about Imbolc, right? In the Celts, you do that earlier in the month. In Rome, you're in the Mediterranean, you can do it a little later in the month. And so February 14th, we clean up everything. February 15th is very interesting. The children of Romulus and Remus, the descendants of them, or the people who are appointed, or by the time we get to about 1000 AD, anyone who's willing, go to the cave where the wolf is said to have nursed Romulus and Remus, and they go through a sacrifice. They sacrifice a goat and a dog and a couple of other things, and everyone is washed in blood. Boy, this keeps coming back, right? Red blood. Oh, red. Interesting. And these guys are given the opportunity. They go through this, and then they're given little strips of the goat skin, and they run through town with nothing on, and they touch any woman that they see with their goat skin.
Woohoo! Your goat skin, honey.
Right, exactly. Not exactly what we would think was fun. And there was a period of there for about 100 years during the time Valentinus was on the planet, apparently was on the planet, where the matrons of Rome would drop their shawls so the men could be touching their back with their goat skins. And it was just part of what you did on February 14th, 15th. And then on the 16th was bedding and wedding. Okay? So the women who felt connected to the guy that strapped them with that lash, or who lashed them, as the case may be, would say, yes, I'll take that one. And then if they decided, it would become the basis for marriage. We're back to Valentinus again. So Lupercalia, we talked about Saturnalia at New Year's, now it's Lupercalia in February, most of us may remember that in the Julius Caesar play, Shakespeare, he talks about how Julius Caesar is offered the crown on Lupercalia, and he says no, and a month later he's assassinated, right? Because he won't take the crown. So Lupercalia is a major thing in the Roman Empire. It's the 4th of July. Just a strange way to celebrate it, eh? Yeah. Did you hear anything about love in that? No.
Bedding and wedding.
Bedding and wedding, right. So there's this romance thing. So Chaucer says that we celebrate Valentine's Day over Lupercalia because Lupercalia is also when all of the birds choose their partners. So now you know why there are birds in the Valentine symbolism. So we got the hearts and the birds, and we got Valentine, right? Now we got three or four of our folks, of our symbols. The flowers, well, gee, it's spring, right? So flowers, National Hearts and Flowers Day. It's honoring that we do have flowers after a winter of no flowers. And it's part of the extension of that concept of Imbolc. Spring is coming. All right. Well, Valentinus became associated with romantic love. And what happens in the church, you can, I'll go ahead and do this. Just take a card, any of them. And what happened in the church was there was no room for romantic love. Remember, you had to be a virgin. There wasn't room for that. You had to be celibate. You had to not engage in that kind of experience. But in the Roman tradition, I'm going to come around. So, in the Roman tradition, there was eros, right? Out of the Greek, we have eros, agape, and philos. The church wanted you to only think about agape and philos. Eros doesn't exist. Except on Valentine's Day. Isn't that interesting? So, what the church did is adapted 1 Corinthians 13, Paul's letter. If I don't have love, it's, I don't have anything, right? And they said, oh, well, we'll use that for romance. But the word that Paul used is caritas, not eros, not agape, not philos, not any of the words that we think of as love. Isn't that interesting? Caritas means heartfulness. If I don't bring my heart into it, I am empty. If I prophesy without bringing my heart into it, I haven't accomplished anything. Isn't that interesting? So what I'm giving you here, there are no accidents, whatever card you got. Everyone's different. Is something to think about. The card that you got is somehow related to your idea or your hunger for love. Your idea of or your hunger for love, with the one that you got, because there are 50 different concepts here. Because agape is nice. That's what we kind of do in here. And philos is nice. That's what you do in your family. But if you don't have eros, you don't have passion. And if you don't have passion, you don't have glue. The glue that keeps us together, I'll come at you, is the passion between us, right? So love is all of those. And what Paul was introducing was caritas, heartfulness. If I don't have caritas. All right, everyone got one? By golly. So these are some of the terms that come up when you start using the word love. You might be actually meaning this, right? I don't get enough of this, or I would like to have more of this, or I am doing this. This is what I do when I love, yeah? So does anyone want to share something that, if it really resonates and if there's a reason it really resonates?
It says sharing things.
Uh-huh.
My email says social pollinators.
That's marvelous. Did everyone hear that? Ruth says, her card says sharing things, and that her email address is social pollinator. Mm-hmm. Marvelous. Yes, Denise.
Mine says thoughtful caring.
Oh, yeah.
I think about it, and pretty much that's what I try to do every day.
Yeah, that's kind of what you embody. Did everyone hear that? Thoughtful caring. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what caritas is. It's heartfelt, thoughtful caring. Mm-hmm. Yes, Linda, and then Gary.
Feeling energized.
Nice. And how did that resonate for you?
Love is energizing.
Nice. Sure.
In my employment world, I'm kind of referred to as a brewmeister. My card says exploring differences.
Ooh, Very nice. Exploring differences. Can you see where exploring differences is part of loving? You know, if you are in a long-term committed relationship and you don't explore differences, if you either say, no, that can't be, or you say, I'm not putting up with that, that's not going to maintain the relationship very well, is it? But if you can kind of gently explore them, it might work. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes?
Mine says seeing the good.
Ooh!
That is a challenge, because growing up in my youth, I saw more negativity in my life, and I still have a lot of negativity.
Aww.
So that's a real challenge, I guess, for many of us, as well as me. Good.
Marvelous. So what Valentinus did, and what Valentine's Day does for us, is help us remember there's so much more to love. Now, there is the other thing. How did all of these cards and these things happen? It was the French. All right. The Duke of Orleans was being held in the Tower of London over Valentine's Day in 1415, and he wrote a poem to his wife. And that poem is on display in the British Museum. And that was the first documented Valentine card poem. All right? And so through the 1500s, that became, late 1400s into the 1500s, that was a very special thing that only the very, hoi polloi would use to express their affection for each other. And then that percolated down. So by the late 1700s, early 1800s, it was normal among middle class and upper class Brits in particular to write poems or share poems and with flowers and hearts. And then in the late 1800s, someone actually figured out a way to print all of that in bulk, and you know the rest. Right. And I can't talk about Valentine's without talking about chocolate. How did that get into Valentine's, right? Well, it turns out that when chocolate was introduced into Europe after Columbus returned in the 1500s, it was known absolutely, without a doubt, to be an aphrodisiac. So if it's about eros, it's got to be chocolate. Thank you very much.